What is the most bizarre coincidence you've ever experienced? This is an entirely true story where the timing was, unfortunately, perfect because of a certain date. When I was in college, AIM was all the rage, and everyone was always signed on with their buddy lists and away messages. At the time, my friends and I were constantly posting clever and funny away messages, much like the status updates found on Facebook today. So, I remembered a prank a high school teacher had pulled on us a few years earlier. One day, he entered the classroom at the beginning of the period, walked to the board without saying a word, looked ominously at us, and wrote, "The world will end in 2 days." He then proceeded to teach, refusing to answer any questions about the cryptic message. The next day he came in silently, went to the board, and wrote, "The world will end tomorrow." Still no explanation. The following day he wrote, "The world will end today." By then we were slightly unnerved, wondering what he could possibly mean. Yet he continued teaching as if nothing were unusual. Nothing happened, of course. We came into class the next day, fully aware the world was still intact, and assumed our teacher had lost his mind. He walked in, as confident as ever, went straight to the board, and wrote, "The world ended yesterday." We all groaned, and he finally explained that it was just a humorous way to get our attention. And it worked. Fast forward a few years to me sitting at my computer, thinking this would make a terrific joke for my away message. So I posted, "The world will end in a week." Friends messaged me, concerned, and I assured them everything was fine and that all would be revealed in due time. I continued the ritual for a week, building anticipation among my closer friends and likely annoying the other 200 people who could see my away message. Then the day came when I woke up, posted, "The world will end today," and left for my morning class. I took my seat in the auditorium just as the professor announced, "Folks, we're going to be canceling classes for the remainder of the day due to the attacks on the Pentagon and the World Trade Center." This was the first I had heard of it, and I had no idea what was happening. The scale of the tragedy had not yet registered with me. I returned home, saw the news, and could not believe what I was seeing. Then I turned to my computer. Nearly 100 messages. Some were shocked but amused, while others were downright threatening. There were plenty of "dude, what the hell" reactions mixed in. A few people even asked if I knew something or knew the attackers. All in all, it was a bad day, and I had a lot of explaining to do. Story 2. My mother told me a random story about how she was in Costco looking for glasses and mistook another girl for me. That alone was strange, since I'm a petite Asian amputee with my left leg below the knee. About a week later, I was on an amputee support site when a girl posted about being a new amputee looking for friends and support. I rarely write back to anyone, but I decided to reach out. She wrote back and told me to check out her blog, where she shared how she got sick and her recovery. While reading it, I saw her mention being at Costco looking for glasses, and my jaw dropped. It was the same girl my mother had mistaken for me a week earlier. I sent my mother a picture of her, and she confirmed it was indeed her. It turns out my new amp twin and I went to the same college. She lives in the town I grew up in, and our birthdays are only days apart. We are now good friends, talk almost every day, and are meeting for lunch this Saturday. Story 3. My dad died back in 1977. When my mom passed away in 2007, we came across my dad's old wallet while cleaning out our house. His driver's license had expired on the very day he died. Story 4. Where the idea to ride a bicycle across the country came from, I do not know. I had not seen my cousins, who lived on the opposite coast, in about 10 years. We had lived together when we were young, and their father, my uncle, had recently taken his own life, so I sold my car, bought a bicycle, and rode from the West Coast to the East Coast. I was new to cycling and had ended up with a racing bike rather than a touring bike, but with limited funds, I had to use what I had. I did not discuss my plans with my cousins, and they had no idea I was coming until the night before my arrival, when I knew I would complete the 3,400-mile journey. On the 28th and final day of the trip, at 10 o'clock at night, I rolled up to my cousin's home. He came outside and offered to let me put my bike in the storage shed. When he turned on the light, I saw hanging on the wall the nicest Bianchi touring bicycle I had ever seen. I said, "I didn't know you rode?" My cousin replied, "I don't. That was my dad's. He always talked about riding across the country but never made the trip." There were other odd coincidences as well. I started the trip on July 27th, my mother's birthday, and ended on August 24th, my mother's anniversary. My mother is the sister of my uncle. Neither of those dates was premeditated. Story 5. A few years ago, a few friends and I were on a road trip to the northern part of the state, Michigan. It was late at night, and my friend Garrett was sleeping in the front passenger seat while I was driving. The two friends in the back were awake, and we decided to play the prank we always do on sleepers in the car. Count to 3, slam on the brakes for a second, and scream like we were in the worst accident ever. Quite fun. So I let the semi I had just passed go by me. It was about 60 feet ahead in the far right lane, and with nobody behind me, we started the countdown. Okay, ready? 1, 2. When all of a sudden, boom! The semi blew a tire on our side, right under a bridge, making it even louder. Pieces of rubber hit the windshield and the side of the car. We were all screaming, and I slammed on the brakes out of panic and necessity. We were all fine, nothing happened, and the trucker didn't even notice he had blown a tire, or didn't care. Instead of just Garrett getting scared out of his mind, we all did. Story 6. I swear, this is a true story. I had a terrible breakup with my girlfriend. I moved out and found a new apartment in a new neighborhood. 1 week later, I was all set and decided to go out to a club near my place with the intention of hooking up. I met a girl who claimed to be a high-end clothing designer, though she obviously was not. She wanted drinks paid for, and I obliged just for fun. I was severely drunk, and as soon as I looked away, she ran off. No big deal. I came back home, smoked weed, and eventually got the munchies. Not knowing where to order good food in my new neighborhood, I went on IRC to chat with people in the local channel. The channel was pretty dead, but I started talking to 2 funny girls. We were having fun, and they said they'd cook some food for me if I was cute. I sent them a picture. Then things got real. They sent back a picture of a cakes. And I knew those cakes. I freaked out. Where did they get a picture of my ex-girlfriend's cakes? It turns out the 2 girls were my ex and one of her friends. Complete coincidence. My ex didn't even know what IRC was before that night. She was pissed that I had sent a picture of myself to girls on the internet, and the conversation went downhill from there. The next morning, I went to the grocery store next to my apartment. Guess who was working as a cashier? The girl from the bar who had claimed to be a designer. Fast forward 2 years. Believe it or not, I was back with my ex. We had been living together for another year when things fell apart again. We broke up and both moved to different neighborhoods. 1 month later, we discovered we were living on the same street, only 3 blocks apart. Edit. I just remembered another story from when I was younger. I'm a French guy from Quebec, and I was once part of a CVEC student exchange program. Our group was visiting Toronto one day. One of the group supervisors was a really funny guy from my hometown, and he was friends with my parents. We were walking down a street in downtown Toronto joking about how everyone seemed to know my father. Out of the blue, the supervisor asked a random guy on the street if he knew my father. I'm not kidding. The guy did. They had gone to university together. Story 7. Once I was walking to a bar when a guy approached me and asked if I had change for a $20 bill. I checked my wallet. I had about $14, and as soon as I pulled it out, he decked me, grabbed my wallet, threw a few more punches, and ran off. At the time, I was working as a delivery driver. Next day, I got a delivery run that turned out to be the guy who had robbed me. It was his mother's house, so he couldn't do anything. I called the cops when I got back to the store and had him arrested. I also lied and said he had taken $60. Don't ask why I chose 60. It was just the first number that came to mind. Justice. Story 8. I was at the gym in the locker room getting my stuff from a day locker. When I opened it, I found someone else's belongings inside. I thought, what the heck? Even if I left my lock undone and this guy threw out my stuff to use the locker, why would he use my lock? How did he know the combination? I then checked the locker right beside it, and there was all my stuff. It turned out I had accidentally gone to the wrong locker, and it just happened to have a lock that looked exactly like mine and used the same combination. Story 9. I got into my car once after driving to a different city. I turned on the radio, and all I heard was silence. I shrugged and was about to change the channel, assuming it wasn't a valid station, when suddenly the voice said, "Daniel." That's my name, so I said, "Yes." Out of amusement. The voice continued, "I am the Lord your God, Daniel. You must follow my commandments." I paused, completely freaked out for a moment. Then the voice said, "And this is the part in the Bible." And I realized the classic hits channel in Cincinnati was actually a Bible thumper station in Bloomington. Story 10. When I was in high school, flip phones weren't common yet. Sometimes, if your phone got accidentally bumped or pressed while in your pocket, it could send a call. One time, my friend and I were at a party, smoking pot and talking about the importance of using the lock feature on our cell phones. We joked that it would be terrible to accidentally call your parents while being intimate or talking about something that could get you in serious trouble. Our conversation drifted into ridiculous stoner talk about how hilarious Teletubbies are. About 15 minutes later, my friend's phone beeped. She had a new voicemail. The voicemail had been sent from my phone by accident, and it recorded her telling me how important it is to put a lock on your keypad so you don't call random people in your phone book and leave recordings of your conversations. Not the biggest coincidence I've ever experienced, but when we were stoned, it felt like the craziest coincidence imaginable, and it completely blew our minds. Story 11. One night I was at home when two girls were talking very loudly in the street at 3 a.m. I went outside and, half asleep, yelled at them to be quiet. They were very apologetic and quieted down. A month later, I went to dinner with friends, 6 people in total, including one girl I didn't know or recognize. The dinner was at a neighborhood pub about 2/3 of a mile away. After dinner, I walked out into pouring rain, and all my friends had already left. I asked the mystery girl for a ride, and she said, "Sure." I was about to tell her where I lived when she grinned and said, "Oh, I know where you live." It turned out she was one of the girls I had yelled at in the street a month earlier. She was nice about it and thought it was a funny coincidence too. And no, nothing happened. Story 12. When I was about 13 or 14, my friends and I would walk through the park to the comic book store nearly every day. Along the way was a small mom-and-pop drugstore where we would stop to buy candy, sodas, and the like. The store was going out of business and had a bin of random crutches for sale for $0.25. My friend, just for fun, decided to buy one. As we walked back through the park, we ran down a big hill and he wiped out, injuring his knee badly enough that he actually needed the crutch to walk. The truly bizarre part was that the same fall that hurt his knee also broke the crutch, rendering it useless. Story 13. One night I was drinking with friends while stationed in Germany. One of those Time Life Best of compilation CDs started scrolling across the TV screen. Me, then a 19-year-old GI in a foreign country full of tequila and bravado, I muttered something like, "John Denver, isn't that guy dead?" My 30-something friend Matt burst out laughing, joined by everyone else. He told me John Denver was very much alive. Not wanting to lose the spotlight, I said, "What? Really? That guy needs to now." Or something equally stupid. Shocked laughter. Fade to black. The next day, I was awakened by pounding on my barracks door. "You've got a call down in the orderly room." Highly unusual. I groggily threw on some pants and headed downstairs. It was Matt on the phone, and he was out of breath. "Do you know what you did last night?" "Huh? What? Who is this?" "It's Matt, you idiot! You killed John Denver!" I started laughing, thinking he was messing with me. But then I heard his tone, his no-nonsense tone. "No, seriously, I'm not kidding. You killed John Denver. His plane crashed last night. I have never attempted to use my superpowers again." Story 14. My girlfriend and I had been trying to conceive a child, but sadly to no avail. I went to the doctor and was told that I was firing blanks. My girlfriend was upset but understanding, and we continued to have unprotected intercourse. About 2 months later, my girlfriend began experiencing morning sickness, painful breasts, and other typical symptoms. Lo and behold, she was pregnant, and I was the happiest man alive. Our child is now 3 years old and doesn't look much like me. We realized that the day we conceived our son was around the same time her ex moved back into the area. Oh, life's little coincidences. Story 15. One time, we were at a bar when a flamboyantly gay guy approached my group of friends and started talking to us. At first, we didn't think much of it and chatted for a minute, but he began crossing boundaries and hitting on every guy in our group. We told him we had no problem with gays and that he could hang out with us, but made it clear that none of us were gay and he should stop trying to seduce us. Apparently, he didn't understand. He pulled me aside and offered me $5,000 to go into a restroom stall and give blowy. I just laughed it off and told him to stop messing with us. I continued hanging out with my friends and then noticed one of them walking toward the restroom with him. I told everyone what he had offered me and that Charles had just gone to the restroom with him, apparently accepting the offer. We all kept our eyes on the restroom door, and about 2 minutes later, the guy burst out and took off running. Charles was right behind him, pulling up his pants as he ran. We followed them outside the bar where Charles caught up to him and beat him to a pulp. The guy was pretty badly hurt. I stayed with him for a while and waited for him to call someone to pick him up. His mom arrived in about 15 minutes. Charles said he gave him the same offer, and when they got into the stall, he told him to give at least half the money first. Without acknowledging this, the man apparently took out his sausage and eggs. Charles insisted on some proof that he would get paid, but the man just kept focusing on himself, so Charles hit him in the face, and the man ran. Fast forward 1 week. I was flipping through the channels when I saw the same man on TV. He was on MTV's True Life, I'm Coming Out. Story 16. This will beat anything else on this thread. For Christmas of 1996, my brother and I got a glorious PlayStation. 2 days later, my little brother decided to buy Crash Bandicoot. We played until it was time for bed, only to realize we had been foolish and forgot to buy a memory card. My dad came in to enforce bedtime and quickly shifted into problem-solving mode. He noticed the menu section for entering password cheats for levels and assumed it was a feature to set your own password to save the game. He then promptly guessed the password for level 14. Frigging level 14. My 11-year-old mind was thoroughly blown. Story 17. I had a crazy dream in which the space shuttle blew up upon takeoff in Central Park in New York. The dream was lucid and incredibly vivid, so vivid that as soon as I woke up, I ran to my computer, wrote out the dream, and sent it to some friends. 2 days later, I was woken by my phone going off the hook. It was my friend who had been calling for a while. He told me to check CNN. I looked at my computer and saw 15+ messages on MSN. I turned on CNN and the space shuttle had just blown up. Story 18. The night's coincidences scared the piss out of me. Maybe 2 days after The Ring opened in theaters, I watched a late show with my girlfriend, spending some time being scared, shitless, and some time making out. Coming home as a young me, having just spent some time with my girlfriend and still shaken from my first Japanese-style horror flick, I was wide-eyed on adrenaline. It was nearly 1 a.m. I was both wired and sleepy as I came in through the garage door that connects to the kitchen. I, being someone who absolutely hates shoes and socks, took them off at the door on the linoleum and stepped forward, immediately stepping into ice-cold water that had apparently squirted out of our fridge dispenser at a strange angle. I recoiled and clipped my head on the fridge. After watching The Ring, the water was a little freaky, but no big deal. The combination of fight or flight and ow, my head left me feeling a little fuzzy. I decided to take some headache pills and stay up a second to let them kick in before heading to bed. So I plopped down in our near-dark living room to avoid disturbing the family and turned on the TV. Cable outage. Static. Cold water. Bumped head. Tired. The static on the TV after my experience with The Ring convinced my animal brain that screaming was the correct response. At that moment, my sister woke up and ran into the living room, maybe 45 seconds after I had started freaking out. She had long brown hair, was pale, and wore a white nightgown, storming in valiantly to see what the hell was going on. I freaked out, tried to back up to the wall, tripped over the ottoman, and bumped my head again. Meanwhile, my entire family was busting up laughing as my parents entered the room, completely failing to understand why cold water and a static TV had set off alarms in my head. Story 19. I met my boyfriend through an online dating site. I was just browsing photos, saw a random cute guy, and sent him a message. The first time we chatted, I found out he lived 8 hours away, but we got along so well that I thought, what the hell? When I told him the town I lived in, a small, obscure Midwestern town of about 16,000 people, he thought I was joking, since he had a good friend from there and had only visited a few months earlier. When he finally came to see me for the first time, he went to his friend's house first. He called me to get my address, and his friend lived 2 doors down from me. That whole first meeting was weird, but my favorite moment was when we went for a walk and stopped to get sodas. He got a Jones soda, which has fortunes under the caps. He cracked it open while we were walking, and after a few paces I realized he was no longer beside me. He had stopped. When I turned around, he was staring down at his bottle cap fortune with a strange look on his face. I asked him what was wrong, and he showed me his fortune. Happiness is standing beside you. We'll be celebrating our 7th anniversary in a couple of months. Story 20. I drink beer that has questions on the inside of the bottle cap. There must be tens of thousands of questions, and I've never come across a repeat. So there we were, sitting out in the sun with the board game Trivial Pursuit. My flatmate picked a card and asked, "What ocean surrounds the Canary Islands?" At the same time, I opened a fresh bottle of beer and looked at the question on the cap. Yes, it was the same question. What were the chances of that? We were stunned for a few moments. Answer: the Atlantic. Story 21. So, I'm at a party at my friend's house, pretty drunk, and I didn't want to stay the night, so I decided to leave early to catch the last bus. I desperately needed to pee, so I got off the bus to find a tree and walked the remaining 45 minutes, part of it through a bad part of town. At night, alone, with a new phone I had recently bought and my MP3 player. Nothing happened to me. The next day, I found out that just a few minutes after I left, armed robbers broke into my friend's house. They took people's phones and belongings and attacked my friend's dad with a machete. He survived. The robbers weren't random. My friend's dad had gotten into financial trouble with some less than wholesome characters. Story 22. When I was a teenager, instead of going to parties and getting drunk, we would drive around and cause trouble. We spent a fair amount of time practicing speed runs through a local park with especially windy roads, and we would antagonize drivers to get them to chase us into the park so we could lose them while speeding around the curves in the dark. One night, about an hour or so after we'd been doing that sort of thing, we noticed a car had been following us for a few miles. We darted through a residential neighborhood and seemed to have lost him, but as soon as we slowed down, he appeared from around the corner, and the chase started again. We drove out into the country, only a mile outside town since it was Kansas, and into a subdivision that was still under construction, hoping he would lose interest. But sure enough, he stayed behind us the whole way. By that time, the chase had been going on for a good 10 minutes, which felt like quite a while for that sort of situation. Resigned to confront him rather than keep trying to escape, we pulled into a driveway and searched the car for anything we could use to defend ourselves. We sat in the driveway with a crowbar, a tire iron, and an aluminum baseball bat in our hands while nothing happened. It was just one guy, and he simply sat there and watched us. A few minutes that felt like hours passed, and we decided that if he wasn't going to approach us, we were just going to leave like we had intended from the start. So, we pulled out of the driveway, slowly drove around him on the fairly narrow street, and watched to see if he would resume the pursuit. He pulled into the driveway, hit the brakes, and when his reverse lights came on for just an instant, we thought he was getting ready to make a Y-turn and continue the chase. Instead, he put the car in park, turned it off, rushed up to the house, quickly unlocked the door, and went inside. The house was one of the only finished homes in the new subdivision, and he lived there. Story 23. My brother and I were on our way to school, and the roads were extremely icy. As we started going uphill on a curve, our expedition spun out of control and crossed into the oncoming traffic lane, missing other cars by just a couple of inches. We also barely avoided smashing into the guardrail and falling off the road. My brother and I sat in the car, completely amazed that we were still alive. About 7 seconds later, my mom called me and reminded me to drive safely. She said she had just gotten a terrible feeling in her gut about us driving in those conditions. Story 24. About 10 years ago, I went on a first date with someone I met online through Match.com. I live in the Philadelphia suburbs, and she lives in the city. I drove into the city for a typical dinner and movie outing, or in this case, a movie, Memento first, then dinner. We enjoyed the movie, and while we were talking and walking to dinner afterward, I told her what I did for a living. I wrote image processing software at a small company she had likely never heard of. She paused and asked, "You don't by any chance know name of coworker friend I've known for many years, do you?" Yes, I do," I said. It turned out she knew him through some online forum about singing, and they had actually met at an event before. We reflected on how unlikely that was, but that's not the coincidence I'm writing about. We continued to the restaurant, having a great conversation and really hitting it off. About halfway through dinner, I felt comfortable enough to tell her that I had gone through colon cancer the year before and had a long recovery after having my colon removed. Not your typical first date conversation, perhaps, but she was genuinely interested. After I mentioned the surgery, she asked where I had it done. Penn, I said. She paused. Who was your oncologist? She asked. Okay. Not the question I was expecting, but I told her. She paused even longer, then said, in fact, demanded, who was your oncology nurse? I told her. At this point, she had the most amazed expression I had ever seen and said, You're that Jerry, and started laughing uncontrollably. I was thinking, what? Every time her laughter started to die down, she'd say, you're that Jerry, again, which would set off another fit of laughter. She literally couldn't get out anything coherent for at least 5 minutes. She was laughing too hard. The suspense was killing me. Maybe 10 minutes and a dozen that Jerrys later, I finally pieced together the story. About a year before, she had been sharing an office at Penn with my oncology nurse. She's not in medicine herself. It was just a space issue, I think. The nurse used to say, I have this one patient who would be perfect for you, if only he weren't recovering from surgery and going through chemo. She even told her the patient's name. Of course, it was me. She and I ended up dating for about a year, and we're still good friends to this day. Story 25. I didn't personally experience this, but it directly involves me. My current girlfriend ran into my ex-girlfriend at a college orientation of about 8,000 people. They didn't know each other at all. They were from towns 20 miles apart, but they ended up sitting next to each other, really hit it off, and even exchanged phone numbers. Later in the day, my ex pulled out her ID card, and my current girlfriend noticed it and said, oh, my boyfriend is from there. My ex asked, who? Both of them were really shocked when they realized it was me. Story 26. I had an extremely disturbing dream in which I was talking to a friend who was away at his first semester of college in a different state. I don't know exactly what made it so terrifying at the time, but in the dream, my friend seemed extremely depressed for some reason. I asked what was wrong, and we started having a long conversation, in dream time, about a bunch of things I don't remember. After a minute or two, he interjected rather cryptically, you know how this all ends, right? I pondered his question for a second and responded with a slightly confused, no. For me, it ends now. For you, it ends in 10 years. I literally woke up in a cold sweat. I don't know why it scared me so much. It was just somehow utterly terrifying at the time. The worst nightmare I had had since I was a young kid. After about 20 minutes, I managed to collect myself somewhat, reassuring myself that it was just a dream, and was about to head back to bed when suddenly my phone rang. It was another friend calling to tell me that the friend I had just dreamed about had killed himself a day earlier. It still gives me chills just thinking about it. Story 27. I was waiting for my boyfriend to pick me up from work in December. He was driving my car. Work closed and he still didn't show, so I was outside freezing in nothing but a red hoodie. I pulled the hood up tight and walked to the nearest gas station. I went inside and used the phone to call someone to come get me, and right after I hung up, I saw him pull up at the red light outside. I ran out to catch him and got into the car. As soon as I sat down, the light changed and we drove off. The first thing he said was that someone had been following him for about a mile. I suggested turning around in a driveway so they might pass us. We pulled into the driveway, and the other car pulled in behind us and blocked it. My first thought was that we had actually pulled into this man's own driveway. Instead, the man got on a bullhorn and ordered us to put our hands in the air and not move. Within minutes, there were approximately 20 police cars from 6 different townships behind us, lights blaring and guns drawn as officers got out and took positions aiming at us. We were trapped in the car for 45 minutes with absolutely no idea what was happening. The man on the bullhorn repeatedly yelling at us not to move. At that point, the SWAT team arrived and took positions all over the man's yard and on the roof, everyone aiming at us. It was the scariest thing ever. Eventually, they ordered us out of the car, had us walk backward down the driveway, then turned to face what looked like a firing squad. We had to lie face down in the driveway, and we were cuffed and dragged away. During questioning, we learned that the police had been following the car because it matched the description of a vehicle used in a string of armed gas station robberies in the area. The culprits had one man go into a station wearing a red hoodie to hold it up, then jump into an identical car and speed away. When they saw me leave the gas station in a red hoodie, they were sure they had the right people. It took a long time to sort everything out, and when we were finally released, I remembered that the friend I had called was waiting in a parking lot down the street to pick me up. She drove the exact same car I did, and when I met her there, she was with a man in a red hoodie. The same undercover officer who had followed us pulled up to investigate, realized he had just arrested us, and joked that our friends matched the description better than we did. 2 weeks later, they actually caught the real culprits. And it turned out, my friend and I knew them. Story 28. I was with a friend at a bar for most of the night. We decided to make the 30-minute walk to my girlfriend's at the time to see if she wanted to come out for a smoke. I started throwing things at her window, but she didn't wake up, so drunkenly I climbed onto her roof, which I had never done before, and went to her window. I knocked, she opened it, and came out for a smoke. That night, she broke up with me, saying she just wanted to be friends, but told our mutual friend something else. When we were walking away and she was finally inside, he told me that she and her ex had been in bed together. A great time to have climbed onto her roof. Story 29. I was in Thailand training Muay Thai for a few months in 2009. During my first week there, I met a few other Americans and we went out to drink and watch fights later that night. We started talking about who we were and what we were doing, and I found out that one of the guys lived in California but was born on the other side of the country and grew up in a tiny town right down the road from where I currently lived. It wouldn't have been so coincidental if I hadn't been enjoying the fact that I was a very long way from home and wouldn't be around anyone from my neck of the woods. He turned out to be pretty cool though. Better story, but unfortunately, not my own. While still in Thailand, I became good friends with an Englishman whose family had emigrated from India. They took trips back home occasionally, and one year, after he had graduated college, they made another trip. They spent some time visiting relatives, then traveled to northern India to a remote region that was ridiculously difficult and dangerous to reach, with narrow roads across a mountain range. While there, my friend randomly bumped into some of his college buddies, who were also there on vacation. Story 30. It was 1989. I was in a seriously broken relationship with the hottest and craziest girl I'd ever been with, let's call her S, and living in Stamford, Connecticut. I was young and thought I could fix her, but it was hopeless. S just wanted attention. After she cheated on me for the third time that I knew of, her best line when I caught her. At least I didn't let him go down on me. He really wanted to. I cut off all contact and decided to leave my low-paying bookstore job to go back to college upstate. S heard I was leaving from one of my coworkers and came by on the day I was moving to try to apologize. I was pretty soft back then, so I was polite, gave her the phone number of my new place, said goodbye, and left. I went back to school and basically forgot about her, having the time of my life. About 6 months later, I was sitting on the couch one day, stoned out of my mind, and in a weak moment decided to call her. I picked up the phone, dialed her number, and got a busy signal. I hung up, and less than a second later, the phone rang. It was her. We had apparently dialed each other at almost the same instant after not speaking for 6 months. It completely freaked me out, but I figured it was a sign and made plans to visit her. It went very badly. She met me at our favorite bar, but had apparently arranged for her new guy to meet her there a couple of hours after I arrived. I was still there when he showed up, and he made an ugly scene, which she seemed to enjoy. Lesson learned, I never saw her again. Story 31. My girlfriend is from Boston, and I'm from Maryland. We both go to UMD, which is how we met. When we first started dating, I hadn't told my mom yet. One day, I got a call from her asking about my girlfriend. It turned out my mom had gone to hair school with my girlfriend's stepmom's cousin, or sister or something, and had found out about us that way. My girlfriend's stepmom's family is from the same general area as I am. Her stepmom went to the same elementary school I did, and her step-grandfather was an orthodontist in practice with the orthodontist I went to as a kid. Story 32. A short while after I was born, my parents received an insurance card in my name, but from a different company. After some investigating, they discovered that another child had been born on my exact birth date with the same first, middle, and last name in the same hospital group, within 30 miles of where I was born. Growing up, we would sometimes get confused at doctor's offices, the DMV. Once I had my driving privileges revoked because they misplaced his DUI in my file. Customs, where he had been arrested and the officer thought it was me, and most recently at LensCrafters. The LensCrafters incident happened in November, so I decided to search online to see what my namesake was up to. It turned out he had died in a car crash that November, driving the same make and model as the car I own. Reading his obituary was unsettling, like reading my own. Story 33. I needed to sharpen my pencil before a math exam. Walking out of a computer lab, I went through some of the other study areas on the floor of the science building, hoping to find someone with a sharpener. Turning a corner, I caught eyes with someone I thought I knew and nodded. She nodded back. I hoped that someone I knew would have a pencil sharpener and save me some awkwardness. As I walked around a curved wall, I lost sight of her. When I got close, I said, "Hey, how are..." And she said, "Hey, I'm..." Before we both realized we didn't know each other. I said, "Pardon me, I thought you were someone I knew. I was just looking for a pencil sharpener." And she replied, "Weird. I know someone who looks just like you." And he texted me to ask if I had a pencil sharpener. She had a pencil sharpener, and we mistakenly thought we knew each other. Story 34. My grandparents ended up in Uruguay because of World War I. My parents were born there, and 40 days after I was born, we moved to Los Angeles. Fast forward to 1999. I graduated high school, a private school, and my little sister was graduating soon. The school had affiliates around the world and was starting an exchange program with the one in Argentina. We hosted a guy and a girl. I was super busy with college, so I ignored the girl for 3 out of the 4 weeks she stayed at my house. Once winter quarter ended, we ended up hooking up. Her sister, who was being hosted by a different family but stayed at our house for the weekend, immediately called Argentina to inform her family. Eventually, I learned that she had rejected a bunch of other guys, so it was a big deal for her family that we hooked up. It got weirder when our parents spoke, because they started speaking in Spanish. Her grandmother was there and recognized our last name. It turned out that her mother's family and my father's family had been very close their entire lives, but since my dad was the youngest of 12, he had missed the connection. They knew everything about each other. My mom had even gone to high school with her mother. Uruguay has a population of about 3 million, really small. It was strange that she randomly ended up at my house after all those twists and turns in life. We get married in 30 days. Story 35. I had a dream about my friend and his girlfriend at the time, getting into a car wreck and dying. I don't believe in psychics or predicting random events, so I hesitated all day. They had gone out to dinner and were heading to my house afterward. Eventually, I decided to call him and tell him to be careful driving and watch for traffic. When he picked up, he said he couldn't talk long because the police had just arrived and he was about to exchange insurance information with a woman. It was only a fender bender, and thankfully, no one was hurt. It was just strange. Story 36. This is a story my mom has told me a few times. The last time I heard it was a while ago, so don't mind if some details are missing. I'm not a god, you know. About 25 or 30 years ago, my mom lived in Buffalo, New York. She had a job with a biomed company that she loved. One day, her boss, a middle-aged balding man, asked her to accompany him on a short trip to meet with another company. I honestly don't know why she went with him, but the important part is that she was with her boss. Anyway, cut to them driving home from the trip late at night. They were on a back road in the woods and noticed a car in front of them. They followed it for a while until suddenly the lights of that car and an oncoming car went out. They immediately realized there had been an accident and drove off the road to help. The car they had been following belonged to a teenage boy, and the other car was driven by a drunken elderly woman. The boy was badly injured. His legs were crushed by the force of the impact, and he was bleeding heavily. They called an ambulance and stayed with him to calm him down. Once it arrived, he was taken away, and my mom was left hoping he would be okay. Moving forward, my family now lives in a town in central New Jersey. My brother and I were both in our high school's marching band. I was in the drum line, so it was cool. I'm a senior now, for time reference. My parents got really involved in the band, especially my mom, and joined the crew that moved our props onto the field. On this crew was a 40-something-year-old man with a severe limp and scarred legs. My mom, being slightly nosy, asked what had happened to him. He explained that 25 or 30 years ago, he was driving down a back road in the woods near Buffalo, New York, when he was hit by an elderly drunk female driver. His legs were badly crushed, and he spent several years in therapy to walk again. He said he was lucky that another car pulled over, a young woman and an elderly balding man who called 911 and got him to a hospital. He never had the chance to thank them until my mom told him her story. Story 37. Here's a quasi-bizarre coincidence. I've lived in Virginia for about 12 years. Before that, I lived in various parts of the South, but spent most of my life in Florida. I moved here during my junior year of high school. One of the guys I met at school, who would become one of my roommates and then my best friend, for many years, has lived in Virginia his entire life. Our last names are completely different. We went camping with his father, and somehow the subject of my family tree came up. My family has lived in a very rural, sparsely populated part of Mississippi for about 150 years. His dad said, "That's funny. My mother's maiden name was the same as yours, and she was from that exact same county." I followed it up, and it turns out we are not cousins. However, we were the only two families in that county with those names, and our great-grandfathers apparently knew one another. Story 38. I live in the United States. When I was 19, I was walking down the street when I suddenly stopped in my tracks because a thought entered my mind differently than any thought ever had before, or ever has since. It felt like it just attacked me, for lack of a better word. The thought was simply a name, Mao Zedong. I literally got the willies, shrugged it off, and kept walking. The next day, I saw a newspaper on display with a huge headline, "Mao dies," and a subheadline saying the news had taken 24 hours to reach the United States. I grabbed the paper and read that his time of death was 1 hour before the moment I'd had that strange experience the day before. He hadn't been ill, hadn't been in the news, and he wasn't someone I knew much about. It was just bizarre. Story 39. This happened to me about 12 years ago. One drizzly afternoon before leaving work, I ordered a pizza to be delivered to my apartment. I only lived 15 minutes away, so this gave me enough time to get home before it arrived, even if I had to drive a bit slower. I had done this before, and the timing usually worked out perfectly. I'd get home, and shortly after, hot pizza would be on my doorstep. On my way home, I was driving down a 2-lane road and noticed a blue truck in the opposite lane with its turn signal on. At first, the driver sat patiently, as he should, since I had the right of way. But as I got closer, I noticed he was starting to turn in front of me. At this point, I was so close that we would have collided if I didn't act fast. I saw that no cars were coming from the other direction, so I pumped my brakes and turned the wheel as hard as I could to the left. My car went sliding, and I remembered hearing my tires squeal. In front of me, I realized I was about to collide head-on with a light pole. I braced myself for a horrible accident. Luckily, I stopped just a few inches from the pole. My heart racing, I immediately jumped out of the car and started yelling at the guy behind the wheel. I'll never forget the first thing out of my mouth. "Do you realize how lucky we are right now?" He got out of the truck too and was apologizing his bum off. I barely paid attention to him because I was so distracted by the truck itself. For whatever reason, he had covered the entire side of it with what looked like hundreds of stickers for a local radio station. He kept apologizing, and I finally wrapped it up with, "Please promise me that from now on, when it's raining, you'll drive super slow like a grandma." He promised he would. I was so shaken up I probably should have sat in the car to calm down, but I knew I had to get home in time for my delivery. I got home shortly after, went inside, and called my boyfriend to tell him everything that had just happened. While I was on the phone, I looked out the window, and that same unforgettable truck pulled up and parked right in front of my apartment. Now I'm thinking, what the hell? Did he follow me home? Then that jerk got out of his truck with my pizza in his hands. The look on his face when I opened the door was priceless. Story 40. This story gets told anytime sibling rivalry comes up in our family. When my dad was 8, he received a little gumball machine for Christmas that only took pennies and came filled with a carton of gumballs. My dad was the youngest and brattiest, and he wouldn't share any gum with his older brother. One day, when my dad was out of gumballs, my uncle decided to punish him. He put a red marble, my dad's favorite flavor, into the empty machine and called my dad into the room. He said, "Hey, I think I hear one more gumball inside and it looks red. I'll give you a penny for it." He knew full well my dad wouldn't share it once he saw it. My dad put the penny in, turned the knob, and the red gumball fell out. Exactly as my uncle predicted, my dad popped it into his mouth, and before my uncle could warn him, He was chewing away. It turned out there was actually another real red gumball lodged inside the machine. Story 41. At court recently, I was sitting in the audience when a witness took the stand. After a minute of feeling really creeped out, I realized I knew the man. 5 years ago, I had been in my driveway cleaning out my car before leaving for school when he walked up and asked for a ride. He was polite, though a bit sketchy, and I agreed since it was on my way. I ended up dropping him off at the site where the crime he was testifying about took place. It was definitely an interesting day. Story 42. It was in 1980, and I was 15 and a huge Beatles fan. A friend of mine had come over to my house, and we had been hanging out in my bedroom for hours just talking. At one point, he said, "You know, I know how to hypnotize people." So I told him, "Okay, hypnotize me." He tried, and when he thought he had put me under, he told me to react as if I had just heard that John Lennon had died. I laughed and told him it hadn't worked. A few hours later, my best friend called. As soon as she heard my voice, she said, "I can tell by your voice you haven't heard, have you?" I asked, "Heard what?" She said, "Someone has just killed John Lennon." To this day, I sometimes wonder whether John Lennon is truly gone, or if I was, somehow hypnotized into believing it. Story 43. My girlfriend and I had been dating for about 2.5 years, mostly long distance. That night turned out to be the end of it. She had planned to visit the previous weekend, but couldn't because a huge snowstorm hit her town. We were on the phone when I snapped at her for some reason. I don't remember why, but it had been happening more often lately. She mentioned that things were getting really hard, and I agreed. Gradually, the conversation shifted toward the idea of breaking up. She was the one who brought it up, and I agreed. She said she had been thinking about it a lot recently, and that the snowstorm keeping her from seeing me felt like a sign from God that we weren't meant to be. I usually put people who see signs from God like that into one category, the crazy bin. Still, that didn't change the fact that breaking up was the right call. We awkwardly said goodbye and hung up. I was officially in the shock phase. Not the kind you feel when someone dies, just the sort where the breakup hasn't fully settled in yet. I told my roommates and tried to take it all in. A little while later, I got invited to a poker game down the hall. It was a $5 buy-in, nothing major, but enough to make me pay attention. I was the second person to deal. And on my first deal, I handed out the cards and then flipped the flop. There it was, in order. J.A.K. all hearts. Her initials. Holy crap. Story 44. So, my mate had met this girl online who was planning to come to New Zealand and wanted to make friends before she arrived. They had been texting for a few months and he had told all of us about her. A few months later, our group was hanging out at one of the boys' places and Jeremy was texting in the corner. I asked who he was messaging. "Oh, just that girl I told you about," he said. Nothing unusual there. Then Brett showed up with a girl he had met the night before in town. We all got to know her. She was from the United Kingdom, and everything seemed normal. But I noticed Jeremy still texting, and I also noticed this English girl texting someone almost in perfect sync. I asked Jeremy what the girl's name was. "Kat," he said. I asked the English girl her name. "Kat," she replied. "Who are you texting, Kat?" I asked. "Jeremy," she said. And just like that, in one of the most bizarre coincidences I've ever seen, these two people who had been getting to know each other online for months were suddenly sitting across from each other in the same room on the other side of the world with no idea until I spotted it. Story 45. When I was 16, I was looking for something to drive, hopefully a hearse. I found one for sale for $1,000, but it had been half renovated. The seller had tried to install a back seat, and it was crooked and had no seatbelts. I tried to talk him down, but he wouldn't budge, so we walked away from the deal. Fast forward 4 years. I had moved out of my parents' house and was living in a completely different part of town. My boyfriend and I went to visit our friend's brand new house. In the driveway next door was a hearse. Same license plate, same crooked back seat, same guy, same price. Just this past month, I went out of town to a tiny place in the middle of nowhere, a Dairy Queen and maybe 1,000 people. While stopping for food, I saw that same hearse again. Same price. Same everything. Story 46. While I was in college, my mom and I moved into a condominium. About a year later, during the fall semester, I went home for a random weekend. When I arrived at the building, I was waiting in the lobby for the elevator. When the doors opened, I suddenly saw a guy from my fraternity who had already graduated. He asked if I was there to visit some of the other fraternity guys. Completely caught off guard and exhausted from the drive, I froze for a moment, unable to respond. After a couple of seconds, I finally processed what he'd asked and told him I had no idea what he was talking about. It turned out that he and two other guys from my fraternity had moved into the building at the beginning of the summer, just a few floors away, and all of us had been completely oblivious to it the entire time. Story 47. Many years ago, before mobile phones, my oldest brother was out walking the dog when he passed an old payphone near our street. It suddenly started ringing, so he answered it out of curiosity. To his surprise, it was the voice of one of his best friends. The friend just started talking, as if everything were normal, until my brother asked how he knew to call this payphone at that exact moment. That was when he realized the payphone's number was almost identical to our home number. Just one digit was different, and his friend had clearly misdialed. My brother tried to explain, but his friend refused to believe him when he insisted he was standing at a payphone while out walking the dog. In the end, he actually had to bring his friend to the payphone to show him the number, and even then, his friend still struggled to believe it. Story 48. When I was 17 or so, my family was in the car driving to my grandmother's house for Thanksgiving dinner. On the highway, there was a sedan in front of us in the lane to our right. My sister said she thought she recognized the driver and asked my dad to speed up so she could see. My dad pulled ahead, and at that exact moment, the woman driving, who had fallen asleep at the wheel, swerved directly into the spot our car had just left. She slammed into the center divider and scraped along it for a long distance. We had been going about 75, which meant she was probably going about 70 when she would have hit us. She missed our back bumper by only 4 or 5 inches. Story 49. I used to work in the wireless industry, doing business sales for a company I hated. I accepted a job offer from a competitor, but since I was in business sales and my manager lived on the other side of the state, I waited about a week before turning in my notice. I sent it to him by email while on my way to a meeting with my new manager in a city 100 miles away. I didn't think much about it, and I didn't even get a phone call from my old manager. During lunch with my new coworkers at a small Mexican restaurant, I came out of the back room and saw my old boss, his boss, and most of the corporate executives eating there. This city was also 100 miles from where he lived, in the opposite direction. I quickly pulled off my new employee name badge and shoved it in my pocket. When he saw me, he dove under the table. I guess he thought I was about to go postal or something. He stuttered something about having received my notice, saying I didn't need to come there to meet him and that he would be glad to pay me to work out my notice and stay as long as I wanted. He was genuinely freaked out. It wasn't until my new coworker walked up with his corporate ID that he realized what was happening. I later heard that the rest of the corporate team razzed him about his table dive for months. Story 50. Today, I stayed after school with a friend for a club, and we hung out afterward while waiting for the bus. She mentioned that she was trying to come up with a good idea for an essay that had to be about public spaces. She was thinking about private property versus public property, and how public property can become private and vice versa. Later, I walked her to her locker, and she started talking about the essay again. Just as she used the phrase public space, a teacher walking down the same hallway, talking to a custodian, began describing how his car had been vandalized in the parking lot because it was in a spot in front of the video camera. It didn't really make sense, but it was interesting. Story 51. When I started college, I joined a summer program so that by the first semester, I already had friends and knew my way around campus a bit. A bunch of friends and I went to registration, and I noticed a girl following us. I said hi, and we all introduced ourselves. It turned out we lived near each other, and over the next 4 years, we became good friends. In fact, we both got jobs at the same company and agreed to live together after graduation. During our last week on campus, a mutual friend organized a barbecue for our group of friends and their families. At the barbecue, our fathers met each other, and it turned out they had known each other when they went to college, the same college we were graduating from. In fact, they had been roommates their sophomore year. Story 52. A new tech school was built in my county in time for my junior year of high school. After much debate, I decided to leave IB and enroll in this school, where all students with a capacity of 200 would receive laptops and could take college classes that counted toward high school credits, allowing them to graduate with a 2-year degree. There was a girl who moved 400 miles to live with her aunt and attend the school, We met in class, started dating, and eventually discovered that both of our fathers had held nearly identical positions at different power plants and had occasionally worked and hung out together 15 years earlier. It still gives me chills to think about that incredible coincidence. Story 53. For the purpose of my story, you need to know there's an inside joke among my friends that I am Jesus Christ himself. One time at a party, two girls told all of us that if someone rolled a pair with the dice, they would make out. I wasn't interested in watching, so I kept to myself, smoking and minding my business. After about 5 minutes, these drunk guys still couldn't roll a pair. I walked over and told my friend, "Give me the dice. I will roll you a pair. In fact, I will roll snake eyes." This is happening in front of roughly 12 people. I took the dice and threw the first one. It landed on a 1. I threw the second, and it started spinning like something out of Inception, looking like it would land on anything else. Then, at the last second, it settled on a 1. Everyone in the room just stared in awe. Story 54. While on a flight from California to Peru, I got into a conversation with the guy sitting next to me. He was going to Peru for a few days and planned to stay in hostels. A few days later, a random taxi driver left a note saying that someone at my hotel had lost a passport in his cab. I contacted the driver the next day and confirmed that the passport didn't belong to anyone in my group, but it did belong to the guy I had sat next to on the plane. Unfortunately, I had no idea where he was staying, so I let it go. A few months later, I was talking to my niece, who lives on the opposite side of the country. She mentioned that a friend of hers had gone to Peru at the same time I did, and it turned out to be the same guy who had sat next to me and lost his passport. Not a crazy coincidence, but definitely a strange one. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.